So welcome back to day 2 of Feminists Delivers. I'm pleased to see we have our ASL support here today, and our apologies for not having that support here yesterday. My name is Rihanna Bennett. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm really excited to be here today. Yesterday was an incredible day 1. It was a little bit of a ride yesterday. We cried and we laughed and we cried some more. And then a group of us were able to speak truth to power yesterday. We had the experience of meeting the Prime Minister. I'm not going to say it was a pleasure. It was an experience. And we went yesterday and we took the words that we heard here and the thoughts and feelings of why we've all gathered as Feminists Delivers and spoke about why are we over here as feminists when the world is over there and these issues and things that we are working on aren't included in that bubble. So I'm really pleased that you all have joined us today for some amazing panels and some great work. We recognize that the nature of the work that we do is quite heavy and can be quite triggering. So we do have some support again today in the room over here in the corner. We have cultural workers and elders that are here if you need a hug, if you need a brushing off, if you need some words. We've got you. We are here to support you. They are not confined to that room, though. They are free to move about. So if you do go in there and there's no one there, there will be a volunteer that will come and find them for you. So good morning. And what other housekeeping? Housekeeping's universal washrooms are in the back to my left. We will have coffee and food on our breaks. Lunch will be provided. And I'm going to turn it over now to Sarah Stewart, who's going to facilitate an amazing panel on resistance and resilience.
Hello there. My name's Sarah Stewart. I'm the Executive Director for Aunt Leah's Place. At Aunt Leah's Place, we work to prevent youth in foster care from becoming homeless, and we work to keep families together. So mothers who are at risk of losing custody, all of our work is supporting around keeping families together. So thank you for being here today. I want to quickly just acknowledge this land that we're on as the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. Yesterday, the report came out for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and there were several calls of action around the child welfare system. And so I feel today we're going to be hearing from panelists who will be speaking about their experiences, their work, that directly relate to these calls of action. And so I have my ears open to hear and learn so much from these amazing women and the work that they've done. And I feel that you're going to be really, you're going to learn a lot today and hear a lot today. And so welcome, and I hope you enjoy it. So we have 4 panelists here today. With us, we have Nikki Scott. She's a program manager at the BUDC, which is with Rain City Housing. It's their first program for women and families. The BUDC operates with a harm reduction approach toward family reunification. Nikki's worked with families in the community in a housing context for 10 years. So welcome, Nikki. We have Corrina Sparrow. Corrina's Coast Salish two-spirited social worker and researcher. She belongs with the Musqueam Nation and Pentlash people and has Dutch ancestry on her paternal side. Corrina has been a helper with Indigenous families and communities for almost 20 years and is currently working as a social development department manager / social worker. That's a big job. She will begin her doctoral studies at UBC this fall, and she'll be looking at Coast Salish two-spirit identity and resiliency. Oh, I forgot my phone for Robin's. Sorry, Robin. We also have with us Sarah Thomas. She's with the Aboriginal Mothers Centre. She's the program manager there. The Aboriginal Mother Centre is dedicated to moving mothers and children at risk off the streets and provides all the services under one roof, all the support, tools, and resources a mother needs to rebuild her health, self-esteem, and skills to regain and retain her childhood. And then, last but not least, we have Robin Raw-Eater, who's an Indigenous woman, mother, and advocate with the, I'm going to wreck this, correct me, the Sitsiga? Sitsiga. Okay, Learning Nation in Alberta. Robin has been actively challenging the Ministry of Children and Family Development and its delegated agency, Vancouver Aboriginal Child and Family Services, bringing attention to the colonial and racist practices carried out by these government bodies, which continue to harm Indigenous children and their families. Robin undertook to challenge the apprehension of her children through the court system, leading to a 3-year court battle which ended with the ministry agreeing to return her children without finding that the apprehension was warranted. Her battle included using the media to publicly expose the injustice, as well as challenging the apprehension in the court. Robin's human rights complaint against MCFD and VACFest, which has been accepted by the tribunal. In addition, Ms. Raw-Eater initiated and facilitates a weekly group supporting other women to challenge the apprehensions of our children. So we're excited to have all these panelists here today. So we're going to start with Corrina Sparrow coming up, and then we've all just met, so I'll be delicately putting up a little 10-minute note for everybody so we can stay on time for everybody. And then at the end of the panel presentations, we'll have an opportunity for some questions and answers. So please welcome Corrina Sparrow.
Oh, I'm way too short for this. Okay, let's move this down. Siem na siya. Itse puayal. Corrina Sparrow, Quinasqui, Talitsin, Musqueam, a Pentlat, a Duts, Ziatalitsin, Queth, Clethiathamth. Dear friends and relatives, my name is Corrina Sparrow. I'm from the Musqueam Nation and the Pentlatch people, and I have some Dutch ancestry as well. I'm really happy to have been invited to speak with you today about child welfare. And I'm really honored to be speaking on the unceded and shared territory of our Musqueam people, Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh relatives. I'm speaking to you today from my position as a helper and as a leader in my Musqueam community. So I run the social development department, as Sarah said, and I'm the one social worker for our community members. And as far as we know, I'm the only Musqueam person who has degrees in social work. We need more Indigenous social workers for our families, and our leadership needs to prioritize and support our community members to get educated about social work and about the child welfare system. When I was thinking about what I wanted to share today, or when I was thinking about resistance to child welfare or within child welfare systems, I was imagining a river, or the Fraser River to be exact, and all the different ways that rivers move around and over and underneath, and the different ways that they transform obstacles that are in their path. I mean, I've been a helper in Indigenous community for a long time now, almost 20 years. And in that time, I've come to learn that it's important for our people to know the child welfare system really well. We need to understand that system and the gaps in the services that are being provided by the province to our Indigenous families. As communities, we need to understand really specific ways that the child welfare system doesn't meet the needs of our families, and so that we can identify ways to help our families navigate through that system. We need to advocate for Indigenous ways of supporting and protecting our families. And our families and our communities know best how to do that. They know best how to care for our own children. The province is not the authority in this regard, and that's very important. It does not know what's best for us. even if it thinks it does. Even if social workers that are working within that system have good intentions for our Indigenous families, they don't. The child welfare system, it isn't set up to support Indigenous ways of protecting our children and supporting our families. The child welfare system is set up to tear our families apart. The province has funding and resources that it's allocated from the federal government to support Indigenous services that it provides. But it doesn't funnel those resources through our nation to support families in a preventative way or in ways that are aligned with our cultural values, our ways of healing and recovery. The child welfare system is set up to focus on services that are provided after care, after the system has already intruded on our families, after the harm has already been done to our children, after it's already fractured our families from our cultures and from our communities. I want to share quickly a story about the Musqueam Safe House. When I returned to Musqueam to work with the families here, we were in a process of reestablishing our safe house, which was previously set up as a group home for Musqueam children and community. And it was also previously shut down by the province because we weren't in compliance with their standards. So I came on to get that safe house reestablished and reopened. And I learned really quickly when I met with provincial child welfare leadership that they didn't want to fund the safe house until we were licensed as a group home through the provincial system. The province wouldn't fund the safe house either unless it had control over who was being placed into the home, how they were being placed, and for how long. But we know that this approach is backwards for our Indigenous communities and our families. It doesn't work for our families at all. Traditionally, in Musqueam, our families lived in longhouses together. We lived whole families under one roof communally, and we supported each other in that way and protected our children in that way. Through our cultural activities, our values, our ceremonies, and our Snawayath, our teachings. And we knew that we needed to be able to place or bring whole families into the safe house if we needed to, not just children. Because child welfare and child safety concerns are whole family concerns. So we didn't take the province's money. We didn't want the province to be able to dictate how those support services were being offered to our families. So we decided to find ways to fund the safe house and run it on our own. But we still did the work. We met all provincially recognized licensing standards for operations and according to their home safety assessment processes. We ticked all the boxes in that way. But we didn't formally pursue a group home license either, because we knew that even that would limit our ability to wrap services and supports around children and whole families in the ways that we needed to. And we didn't want the province to have control over those services either. So today, the Safe House is operating as an out-of-care option in the province's eyes. It operates outside of the limits of the child welfare system because, as I said, the province doesn't fund out-of-care services adequately. We still don't take provincial child welfare contracts for the Safe House, if that means that they have control over what those services look like. We don't want it. We did our relationship work with the province as well. We met with provincial child welfare leadership and social workers and explained to them that they don't ever have to remove Musqueam children from their families because we have a safe house and community where they can all live together and be supported. That we have trained helpers in that safe house that can support families to restore balance within their own homes in our way. And for the past 5 years, I'm really happy to share that Musqueam hasn't had one child removed from parental care or from family care. Thanks. And the province loves utilizing our programs and services because it makes for good statistics. But it still doesn't support us financially, regardless. There's still work to be done in community. The needs of our family are high, and the resources in the child welfare system are few. And we still need more funding. We want more funding, and we want more resources to support our families and to expand our services that we know already work for our families. The Safe House is expensive to run, and I recognize that not every nation has capacity to fund its own Safe House, and that's an issue. But the value of our children remaining connected to family, to community, and to culture is far outweighs the cost of identifying funding opportunities for these kinds of services. And as a sovereign nation, Musqueam has to remain in control of those supports for our own families. And it's the same for all Indigenous communities. But I want to say that as nations and as communities, we must continue to resist the provincial child welfare system and their assumptions that they know what's best for our people, that the child welfare system knows best how to care for our children, because it doesn't. We really need social workers that are working within those provincial systems to understand this. And we really need them to understand their role and their place in this work, which is that they're a funding source for Indigenous support services. And they're supporters of Indigenous social work, but they're not the authority over our children and our families. The government and our Indigenous leadership, they need to understand and advocate for the fact that our Indigenous communities and our children don't need to be rescued by the government. They don't need to be rescued by provincial child welfare. We need control of the funding and the resources to support the work that we already know works for our families and for our communities. To me, that is Indigenous resistance to child welfare. So I really want to thank you for your time today, and I'm really honored to be here at Haitseepka.
Thank you, Corrina. That was amazing. I'm excited now to co-present, I guess, with Robin. We're going to do more of a casual. You can stay there. I'll jump for the tech in the back. I'm going to jump to a mic in a minute. And Robin and I are going to have a conversation about her experiences and how she's been so resilient and resisting systems that are dividing families.
Thank you. I would like to acknowledge the unceded traditional territory that we are on, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish Nation. My name is Robin Raw-Eater. I'm from Siksika Nation, Alberta. I'm Blackfoot and half Black. I grew up here on the West Coast, and my mother is a residential school survivor. My father's a residential school survivor. I'm an intergenerational residential school survivor. I grew up in and out of foster care. Now my children are currently in the foster care system and going through the same trauma, the generational trauma that a lot of us Indigenous people face. I really feel that my children were wrongfully taken out of my care, and because of that, I really resisted the system. I fought a 3-year battle with the MCF, Ministry for Children and Families, and their delegated agency here in Vancouver. And a little bit about what has been going on with my children. Apparently, within their services, it's okay for children to be excessively physically restrained. My daughter was excessively physically restrained to the point where it left bruises and lacerations on her arms, her forearms, her thighs, and her ankles. I seen this during the visit, and because I seen this, I reported this to the police. And when I reported it to the police, my visits got cut off for 1 year because I wouldn't allow this delegated agency to deal with this internally. I was like, why are these people not being charged for putting their hands on my kids? If I sent my daughter to school with bruises or lacerations or anything kind of a physical restraint, the system would be on top of me. So basically, my 8-year-old daughter also attempted suicide. I feel that this is one of the youngest children in the system, and because of that, I protested, and I wanted more. I wanted to know what mental health supports were being put in place because of the trauma of the separation of my family and my kids. Basically, I felt because they're being denied, I felt like we were being discriminated against. I decided to go to the Human Rights Tribunal. I started a Human Rights Tribunal case. It's been very long. Definitely, it's taken me 1.5 years just to find out that I will be receiving a trial. And the trial will be sometime next year. So, and not only that, but, I also sit on the board of directors for the Downtown Eastside Women's Center. I've been doing that, co-chairing there for 3 years. I also, since then, I help facilitate a support group for parents dealing with the child welfare system. Because when our kids get taken, it is so easy for the parents and the mothers to fall through the cracks and to not have that support and services and help navigate through the system. And also, I want to encourage these other parents to stand up and to fight back against the system. And, what else?
Well, we were talking in the back a little bit, and one thing you spoke about, and Corrina touched on, is that concept of, like traditionally there's a longhouse and there's community and support. Maybe you can touch a bit about sort of where you found that during your journey, how that has not been provided, and what the challenges around that might be.
So basically, let's talk about the resiliency and, where I really got my strength from. When I lost my kids, I was completely hopeless. I had lost everything. I felt like I was at a funeral. I felt so empty. And you know what? I had no supports and no services and nowhere. Thank goodness I was living in a supportive housing with the YWCA organization, and they were able to support me for 2 years. But I've also found my sanctuary and a lot of the help and support at the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, which the elders kind of said, Robin, we see what you're doing within the community. We want you to come and sit down with us, and we want you to sit on the board of directors and represent us. So you know how when the elders ask you to do something, you have to drop everything and you have to do what they ask you to do. So basically, my fight for the child welfare had to be put on hold. And from there, I sat on the board of directors as the elders representative for 2 years. And basically, it kind of brought me back and it grounded me to really, stay focused and not to lose the fight. So, that's a lot of where I got the resiliency. I feel like what is happening and what is going on with the Indigenous children, there's a crisis. There's a huge crisis, and people are not talking about it. So this is why I'm digging my heels in. I've also been working closely with the media. So the media is also taking part of my story. My name is anonymous because of my children are underage. But definitely, I feel working with the media, having my human rights complaint. Also, I did set a precedence within my trial for my kids, and what this precedence was they sent me for a parental capacity assessment. And this is an assessment by a Caucasian lady from Australia. She's only been here in Canada for 2 years. She's a forensic psychologist. So she's not even had Indigenous studies in Australia. She hasn't had Indigenous studies here. And she's coming here to this delegated agency, and she has done 30 to 35 parental capacity assessments on families previously to mine until my case came along and I questioned her expertise. Apparently, the judge threw her assessment out of the court, which has never been done before. And So with that being done, that also gave me the drive to, start this support group and to find out where these other parents are, and if they've been affected by this parental capacity assessor, then, we really need to kind of, find out and fix these families, because there's families that are probably not even together. But it's been a long struggle, and since I have won my trial, basically my kids are being returned to me without any findings of ever needing protection to begin with, and this is after 3 years of fighting.
Three years is a long time. You mentioned to me when we were talking in the back that soon your girls are coming back to you, but you still have a lot of suspicions.
Definitely. I have a long way to go. I am moving into the Aboriginal Mother Center with my friend here. So I'm moving in the Aboriginal Mother Center, and there they are going to be returning my kids within the next 2 months as a gradual return. And it's amazing. It's amazing. So I just wanted to share a little bit about, my story, my personal story, and my resilience and my struggle. So I do have a support group. I facilitate that every Monday from 12 to 1 at Reach Medical Clinic, 1145. Anybody that wants to come and support and help parents that help them to navigate through the system, some supports and services. So I look forward to maybe one day seeing you all there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amazing strength and resilience right there, and the work you're doing to sort of speak to truth to power is pretty impressive. I know that I'll be looking to connect and connect with you more over the next few years. And Sarah, it sounds like you've got someone who's coming into the Mothering Center who's going to point out what's working and not working well. That's good to have. I know I'm always appreciative when I have someone coming in to Aunt Leah's who will tell me straight up how things are going. I'm like, good. So we didn't really talk about order. Nikki, are you fine with being the anchor and having Sarah Thomas go next? Okay, so we've got Sarah Thomas, who, a fun change up on the panel. She's got a PowerPoint presentation, so for the tech in the back. And then, Sarah, I believe you'll be able to see it right here. Okay. And then, remember the green button goes forward? And then if you can choose. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Sarah Thomas is with the Aboriginal Mother Center.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? Okay. My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm a Shuswap from Musqueam First Nations in Enderby. Family in the house. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into child protection. My background is child protection. I've been a family support worker at the First Nations Urban Community Society in New West, and I also, in 2007 to 10, I was a family support worker at the Aunt Leah's house in Burnaby. In 2010, I ended up with my sister's 4 children. I had 6 of my own, and my sister abandoned her children and she was down here on the downtown east side. I ended up going to the ministry down here, and I'm not even moving this, but it's going. But yeah, it's going. Can I just stop that for a bit? Okay. So the reason why I got into child protection is because my whole background was in child protecting my own children, because I thought that my mom was from residential school, my dad was incarcerated all of his life, and as I started having my own children, I started realizing and thinking that I was a really bad parent. So after my 6th child, and I kept taking a parenting program over and over again because I wanted my kids to not have the same lifestyle that I did growing up in addictions. And July the 3rd, I'll be 24 years clean and sober. You know, and I think that when I brought my kids into the world, I as a parent had to take ownership of myself and my children. I've never been on income assistance once. I've always encouraged and promoted my children to, if they want something, they have to work for it. And out of all my 6 kids, 4 of them have graduated, and I've still got 2 more to go. So in 2010, when I had my sister's children, I went to the ministry down here. They told me that I should go and get in home of a relative, which is like $250 a kid, and I just said no. And because I had the background and knowledge of where to go, I ended up contacting my band, Spotsylvania First Nation, and I talked to my aunt, which was on council, and she ended up getting the child services involved, and my sister's kids ended up going into care. I was able to promote to my band that I wanted to keep these children, and my chief and council thought that I wasn't qualified or wouldn't be able to handle 10 kids. And I said, give me a chance, and I will prove you wrong. So as of today, I've had my nieces for 10 years, and 2 of them graduated. You know, and I went to the chief and council, and I said that, you know, historically, if you look at it, we have my grandma and my grandpa having 17 siblings. And if you were given our own elders a chance to parent their own children, we wouldn't have so much incest or, you know, historical trauma in our families. And I had to stand up for myself because a lot of my family members that I reached out to and said I need help, they said, just let the child protection take them. And I'm like, oh my God, I do not want my sister's kids all spread around, you know, the province. So I stepped in and I took them. And so as I started working and I got back into the work field after having some health issues myself, I ended up walking into the doors of the Aboriginal Mother Center as a Housing First worker. And I wanted to step away from child protection because when I was at the Aunt Leah's house, I wanted to take all the babies home, which I think I had enough kids already, but so when I left, it was a really hard decision for me to do, but I had to, one, take care of my health, and 2, I had, you know, four kids that were very neglected and abused, and so I had to put a lot of, you know, things in place for them. So at the Aboriginal Mother Center, we have gone through a huge amount of changes with the changes that the new executive director has promoted. We are trying to do the under one roof approach, which has been really beneficial because just last year, our transformational housing had 18, out of the 18 moms that we worked with that had ministry involvement, 11 of the children were returned. And I want that number to increase, and I want that number to get a little bit stronger. And I think that with some of the moms that we have coming in is going to help us do that, because, you know, in order for us to help other clients that we are working with right now, we need to have that input. We need to understand what their struggles with. We need to understand where we can go and what direction we want to build the Aboriginal Mother Center to. And that's what I think that the Aboriginal Mother Center has provided. We have 16 units on the top of the building, as you can see in the picture there. And on the bottom, we have a community kitchen, which opens to a lot of the Homeless Action Week events. We have really good cooks in there. And then we have the outreach department downstairs. So first, I don't know how to work this thing. The green button, it is? Or? Okay, well, I'll just keep talking because I'd rather do that. But as the Aboriginal Mother Center, we are doing a lot of really good changes. My department in the outreach, I've housed absolute Indigenous people. Just last year, we had 38 off the street, which has been really, really awesome. We also do the non-housing first, but under this new program through LUMA, it's called Reaching Home. So we do a lot of trying to keep families from losing their children. A lot of backpass social workers call us to get us to help with that. And the other area that we're really working on is just education, getting a lot of our families out back into the workforce or into school. And we also have a daycare center up in the main floor for the moms upstairs, and it's open to the community. So there's 25 spots there. And also we are noticing that there's a huge increase in kids coming in that have never been assessed or so we've actually been networking with a lot of awesome agencies out there, First Nations Health Authority, to do assessments and get the supports that we can to have our kids go into the school system with 100% chance of success. So. Yeah. Well, I think yeah, it keeps doing stuff. But anyway, so there's the Aboriginal Mother Center is an awesome place to start out at. And I've actually was a housing first worker, and now I've become the outreach program manager. And my executive director, that Barb Lawson-Swain, she was supposed to be here today, and she is in Winnipeg, and she put me out to the for the panel, and I was like, thank you. So, but I just wanted to thank everybody for listening to me ramble on, and sorry about the PowerPoint, it didn't kind of work, but the Aboriginal Mother Center has a website, so if anybody's interested in looking at and checking it out, it's an awesome place to come in, check out. And on Sunday I was able to do another presentation from 11 to 3 o'clock, and so some of the panelists were quite impressed with what we have there to deliver. So my job as a program outreach manager, I know the struggles that people have with the ministry and with VACFAS. I always try to encourage and give them the support that they need to make it through the day, and also to let them know that we are walking with them. We're not walking behind them. We're not walking in front of them. We are walking beside them. So with that, I want to thank you, all my relations.
Thank you, Sarah. That was amazing to come in to replace your ED without your PowerPoint working. Well done. And I do have to say that the work that's being done with the Aboriginal Mother Center is really important work, and there's not enough resources out there, and so it's a really valuable resource to find out more about. And so, last but certainly not least, we have Nikki from Rain City, and she's going to speak to us about the program there, the Budsy. So, yes, right. She's going to stand up. It's exciting.
My name's Nikki. I'm from the Budsy. I'm very grateful and honored to be an invited guest here today with this amazing panel. I met Robin a couple years ago at an awesome protest in front of the MCFD offices. I'm incredibly jealous of the daycare at the Aboriginal Mother Center. I'm just really thankful to be here. So I'm going to talk about Rain City's family housing program. It's a harm reduction approach to housing families, which is fairly unique. I guess I want to just start with a question for everyone to think about. What if child apprehension was not an option? If it wasn't an option, if it was not on the table for kids to be removed from their families, what would it take to keep families together? I think that's the question that we all need to ask ourselves. I'm going to start with a story, not my story, a woman's story that I got permission to share with you, because I think it shows a shift in a conversation and a shift in a dialogue with a broken ministry. So Amy interviewed to live at the Budsy in 2015. We've been open for 4 years yesterday, I think, or the day before, our 4-year anniversary. We were 6 months from opening when she interviewed. We were reviewing 1,500 applications for 147 units. So we could use 10 more, please. Many women interviewed with us got accepted into their new housing and then had to wait 6 to 8 months to move in, and a lot can change in that 6 months. At the time of the interview, she was pregnant with her first child and had been struggling with an opiate addiction for a number of years. She gave birth at Fur Square before her housing was ready. For those of you who don't know, Fur is a combined care unit at BC Women's. Provides pre- and postnatal care to pregnant women using substances and infants exposed to those substances. So Amy was one of 151 women that went through Fur that year. Currently, about 2/3 of the mothers are going home with their babies, but one of the biggest barriers to this is the lack of housing. So Amy's housing wasn't ready. She overstayed her time at Fur. We weren't open yet. She went to family treatment, and there she relapsed, and her baby was removed into care. So in the fall of 2015, when we were finally ready, when Amy's apartment was finally ready, she was moving in without her daughter. 2 years later, November 2017, Amy had spent 2 years working around her recovery and ministry requirements for access to her daughter. She'd gotten pregnant a second time and gave birth to another child. We held her suite at the Budsy over this whole period, her family suite, while she went through 3 months of ministry-mandated supervised residential program and then 6 months in family treatment. 2017, she's having visits with her kids. Her mom is pitching in. She's got a family friend that's helping facilitate access. She's connecting with supports in the community. She's having overnight access. Both of the kids are practically home. Daycare is happening on a working schedule. She's seeing her addictions counselor. And then 2 weeks before, I'm going to reference substance use and I'm going to reference overdose, and everyone comes out okay in this story, so you know. 2 weeks before her court date, and the final return, Amy used drugs in her apartment and she overdosed. She survived, but that was not a clear outcome for several days. The kids were in her apartment but out of view of their mom. So somewhere between getting the kids up, getting them breakfast, and getting ready to take them to daycare, she used in the bathroom with the door locked. She was taken to hospital, and her mom took the kids home, and we all waited. And that was Friday, and she didn't wake up till Sunday. On Monday, I was on the phone with her social worker, and her social worker described this return as a last chance agreement and one that she had blown. And I said, "What the hell is a last chance agreement?" Amy had an addictions counselor and apparently a relapse prevention plan, but none of us had ever seen it. Her social worker hadn't seen it. We had support and backup childcare. She was living in a harm reduction program. Staff on site regularly step in to take kids to daycare. If mom's not feeling well, we'll pick them up from school. We make safety plans with women around their substance use all the time. Every suite has a phone that can reach the front desk when you hit 0. Women come in and pick up harm reduction supplies. They have conversations with staff. They talk about substance use, and they talk about how to keep themselves safe. None of this was accessible to Amy because she was parenting under ministry supervision, and the stigma was too high for her to make a real safety plan, and the stakes meant that those kids almost lost their mom. So I explained to the social worker how we had all failed her. I explained to her the personal impact of responding to that scene and seeing our complete failure. If we're going to work with parents who use substances in a harm reduction context, we must make it safe for them to do so with transparency. So this conversation changed the ministry's approach to this situation with Amy. The relapse prevention plan was scrapped, and a new relapse response plan was created, and we all signed on to it. Everyone around Amy acknowledged that she might indeed use drugs again. And if she followed the plan and kept herself safe, this was not necessarily going to be a child protection issue. Amy had this really unique situation with some not uncomplicated family support, but more support than a lot of people have. And the ministry ended up backing this 3-way guardianship plan. So basically the kids have 3 formal guardians, and if Amy needs to step out, if she's struggling, the kids can automatically have 2 other people that they can be with, and the ministry is backed off. In our last meeting, Amy's social worker opened up the circle describing this new plan as centering harm reduction. Amy's family spoke and described the ministry's shift to harm reduction as critical in allowing them to shift their own former reaction to Amy's use, which was one of disappointment and judgment, and it became one of support and responsiveness. They explained that this shift had allowed them to see Amy's relapse response plan as a map for how they were to respond and have her back and keep the kids safe and keep those kids' mom alive. So Amy's got her 2 kids now. She's in a 1-bedroom apartment. It's very cramped. We need more bigger supported housing. The plan's been tested more than once, but it's working for now. And it's fundamentally changed our conversations with the ministry. So I won't sit in a meeting anymore with social workers and a mom. I won't sign on to a relapse response plan or talk about our participation in a safety plan without letting her and the social worker know that if she is using and she is keeping her kids safe, I am not going to make a report to the ministry. I'm going to consider that a safety plan. And I've made this very clear with the social workers, and I think it's changing our conversation to a harm reduction approach. The stakes are too high in our current opiate epidemic. So I wanted to start with that story because I think it's, I feel like it's the mandate and the work that we're trying to do at the Budsy to change that conversation around harm reduction. And some of the bottom lines that we work with around that mandate are that parents can use drugs and be parents, that there are systemic barriers that prevent some families from staying together. Racism, poverty, health, stigma, colonization, government policies, immigration, isolation, poison drugs. We all have an obligation to undermine and correct these systemic barriers. We see well-supported family reunification as decolonizing practice. Funding and services need to be directed towards keeping families together and towards family reunification. And acknowledging that there may be folks in the room who grew up in the foster care system or are foster parents, my bottom line is that kids are not better off in foster care. If there was every resource available to keep a family together and keep a family healthy, then there's no need for kids to be in foster care. A little bit about the Budsy. The Budsy's been open 4 years now. It's about 3 blocks that way. It's on the site of the old Drake, if anyone remembers the old Drake. So we tore down the biker strip bar and built children and family housing. It's a little bit haunted, yeah. The concept for the Budsy came out of another one of our programs, our first women's program, the Vivian, which is also a couple blocks that way. The Vivian opened as a response to women going missing and being murdered in this neighborhood. And the project was built to allow women to work inside their homes and to have a safe place to work indoors. But these women didn't have any connection with their kids. They didn't, or any way to meaningfully facilitate connection with their kids. There was no place for their kids to visit. They couldn't have their kids come over and stay the night. So we built the Budsy, a family program. It's 147 units. So it's massive. It's a mix of 106 studios. So we've got a mix of single women and family units, 1 to 3 bedrooms. The really cool thing about that model is that we're able to house multiple generations of a family in the same building. So often we've got mom and her kids in the family program, and grandma upstairs and auntie upstairs, and then teenage daughter shows up with her kids, and we've got to open up another family unit, and we've been able to really prioritize keeping families in the same building, which is huge for the community support around that family. We are a harm reduction program that looks a lot of different ways. Food is harm reduction, housing people is harm reduction, having a daycare is harm reduction. We also provide harm reduction for folks who are using substances. We take a harm reduction approach to sex work. It's been a challenging, it's been a really scary thing to communicate with the ministry since we opened, but I think that we're able to do it really responsibly and safely. We've just opened an overdose prevention space in one of our studio apartments. So women can use safely there. It's a peer witness space. A mom could come down to the front desk and ask for access to that space, and that's an opportunity for us to have a conversation about who's watching the kids and how the kids are safe. Some of the shortfalls in the child welfare system, a lot of them have already been named. We also see a huge inadequacy in resources to family preservation and preventative supports, and it's often too late after the removal. It's months and months of wait to get a family pres worker when you've already identified that you're struggling and that you need support. We often see punitive responses to asking for help. Women who call and say that they need respite for a couple days, they're asked to sign a voluntary care agreement, and then week 2, 3 rolls around and it becomes a removal order. And that's for saying, hey, I'm struggling, I need a break so I can access my resources and supports. We see a lot of prescriptive conditions for parents to follow that have nothing to do with what they identify themselves as what they need to keep their kids together. Inadequate health resources for parents in terms of mental health and substance use, and not enough childcare or respite options. Some of the ways that we're challenging the system, we're women-led housing, so the lease is always in mom's name. She can bring her partner in, and they can live together, and they can raise the kid together. We're probably going to keep him off the lease so that if things go sideways, it's up to her what she wants to do with her housing. We have cultural supports and programming at the Budsy. We're a non-Indigenous agency, Rain City in general, but we are working towards decolonizing practice. We have a brand new Indigenous Services Department. We have Indigenous cultural liaisons in most of our programs, as we do at the Budsy. We have a number of really amazing Indigenous family workers in the program who are ex-child protection workers as well. We have a lot of peer-led programs to build solidarity in communities. So rather than doing a lot of mandating programs, we have moms organize things together. So they can build relationships in the building, and then if they're in crisis, they have somebody to contact. They know their neighbors got their back, and we can make creative safety plans in the moment. Keeping families together, what does it look like on a day-to-day basis? It might be doing a couple loads of laundry. It might be going up and doing someone's dishes. It's advocacy with the ministry, making sure that nobody goes alone to those VACFAS or MCFD appointments, making sure that there's someone in the room, a third party when you're on the phone, so we can hold people accountable to the plans that they're making. How am I doing for time? Okay. One of the challenges we're seeing is a lack of transitional options. So the Budsy works for a lot of people. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people are going to need an abstinence-based approach. Some people have a hard time being around substance use. Some people don't want to be in this community. There's lots of reasons that people want to move on, and there's just not a lot of other options. I think we imagined ourselves being part of a housing continuum that just doesn't exist. So we've got moms who don't need 24-hour staff support right now, but we don't have room to bring in more women that do. We went down to New Orleans back in the fall and talked about the Budsy and talked about child welfare in BC at a harm reduction conference, and it was like speaking another language in a lot of sense. Jurisdictionally, down there, the approach to substance use and harm reduction is just so vastly different. We were talking about opening up an overdose prevention space in a family building in Vancouver, and there was a woman sitting at the round table who was facing up to 15 years incarceration for having used heroin while she was pregnant. So it's really interesting to get out of the bubble sometimes and understand the context of the work that's happening here. I think that there's a real movement building that these women are building. There's a movement to bring our children home. A growing resistance across the province and across Canada from Indigenous communities to have the right to keep their kids and care for their kids. And I'm really excited about the group that Robin's doing. I think it's so important for women to be able to tell their stories and to enact resistance, and it's so dangerous. It's such a power-loaded system. And we have to figure out ways for women to be able to tell their stories and to tell each other their stories without fear of repercussions, and to be able to fight for change in the system, to be able to get a new social worker if you're not being heard, to be able to complain about the way you've been treated, to be able to say that the last 3 years have been unjust, and to demand change. And that's a really scary thing to do in that kind of system. So that's the work that I would like to be a part of. Thank you.
On. Okay, thank you. So we're able to open up the floor now for questions. Sometimes it can be a bit slow for the audience to get into doing questions. If anybody has a dying question to ask right now, you can jump up to either of the mics up there and ask away. Otherwise, I have a ton of questions. So feel free to jump up, and then until anybody comes up, we can just sort of facilitate a bit of a piece up here casually. And if you do jump up and I don't see you there, just yell, Sarah, and I'll be like, oh, right. Okay. So one thing that I'm always sort of trying to make sure I'm aware of is that there's always folks in the audience that might not know the historical context or the background around what we might be talking about. Sometimes there's a lot of jargon out there that people are like, what are you even talking about? And so I thought I would open it up to the panel. If you guys wanted to talk a little bit about why are we talking about decolonization within the child welfare system? What's the history there? I don't know if anyone is able to speak or feels comfortable to speak to sort of about the history and how there's this huge connection between colonization and the child welfare system. Anybody feel up for that one? I start off with a heavy one.
Okay. Well, my understanding, my mom was from Musqueam First Nation, and she was actually half Musqueam and half German. And so she was pretty much shunned from her reserve. So when I started having my own kids, I started realizing that one, my dad was incarcerated most of his life. I was a product of the residential school because my mom was in residential school, and I, as a young person having children, I was brought up in a non-Aboriginal on the island, Vancouver Island. I grew up on Vancouver Island, and we were the only Aboriginal person in the community. So I didn't even know that I was Aboriginal because my mom wouldn't talk about it, and my dad didn't want to be Aboriginal because of his background. So when I started doing my own learning and education of where or who I was like, oh my God, I'm Aboriginal or Indigenous now. But and as I started going to the parenting program, and I was doing drumming and doing some teaching of my own to my children, and my son, which he was 5 years old at the time, I told him that he was Indigenous, and he was this is what his culture was, and because he was more white or Caucasian, because his father was Caucasian and I was Aboriginal, so every day he was looking at his skin and trying to understand where he came from. And he says, any day now, Mom, I'm going to be an Indian. And I was just like, oh my God, that is just the cutest, right? But I was always embarrassed because my parents would talk so negatively about being Indigenous. But when I started getting into my own culture, I grew a great pride because I was a lot of people wanted to be the same color as I did. And, and I think that with the education within our own families, I didn't realize how hard it was for my mom to parent me as a child, because when I started having my own children, I loved having them with me all the time and hugging them and, you know, waking up with them. And even through my addiction, I didn't realize that, you know, at 5 years old, when my dad was, you know, drinking alcohol with me, that was not okay. It was so normalized. And so when I started getting into the field of child protection, I didn't want to be shamed for what was taught to me. I wanted to empower my children to be proud of who they are and where they came from. And for myself, I wanted to acknowledge and be open to not just book smart, because when I went to college, I had a lot of people say, you know, oh, I just want to fix these people. And I, you know, I'm like, fix what people? You know, the people that we work with on the downtown east side. And I was just like, no. I want to be somebody that can walk the talk. I want to be somebody that can present to, you know, social workers that we are working with people. We are working with somebody's daughter. We are working with somebody's, you know, grandchild. We do not need to be on separate continuums. We need to work together. You know, I wouldn't want my children to be apprehended, but when my sister's kids came into my care, I had to make a choice, because that's a lot of work that I had to do to keep my children together. And today I can say that I've successfully kept my children and my nieces together for 10 years. So.
Okay. I'll just share just a little bit about that in terms of historical context. What I was thinking when you put that question out, you know, the child welfare system today, or at least since its inception, is absolutely rooted in a history of colonial genocide against Indigenous children and families. Absolutely, 100%. And that genocide, you know, has morphed and changed shape over time. But its intention has always been very consistent, and that's to split our families apart, to break us apart, to split us from our cultural knowledges. You know, when the first colonizers, you know, came over to our shores to settle these lands, they recognized very quickly the power and authority that our Indigenous women and our Two-Spirit people had, you know, in our Indigenous systems. And they recognized that in order to colonize or take over the land and the resources here for their own gain, that they needed to break that up. So they went after our women, they went after our children, they went after our Two-Spirit people and our families, you know, and that started, you know, systemically or through legislation and policies that they started to put out there. They created the residential school. Once they run out of room and once they sort of get scolded internationally for how they're treating Indigenous people, it changes shape. It became the 60 scoop. They went after our children, again, that way. Today, you know, the child welfare system is just the residential school in a different mask. You know, they're after our children, they're after our families for a reason. You know, because that's what makes us who we are as Indigenous people. Our families, our children, our women, our Two-Spirit people are connected to this land. And they're continuing to try and split that up and to justify it by saying that we need to be rescued, you know, that we're inadequate, that we're less than, inferior, you know, to European and settler ways of knowing and being. So that context, you know, it's a historical context, but it's really important that we put into our minds that that context is alive and thriving today, and we must continue to resist it every day and support our children and our families and our Two-Spirit people to return to circle, to return to our own ways of knowing and being, and to our own land and communities and cultures that way. So I just wanted to share that. Hi, Chika.
Hello? Hello? Oh, okay. As I was saying, I traveled all the way from Fort Nelson, BC, to come to your conference. And when you live in a rural, isolated environment, you tend to see the same people going around and around and around. So one of the things that I realized, and I've worked in the Aboriginal organizations for many, many years in different parts of British Columbia. But I think that when I think about colonization, I think that they wanted to strip us of who we are. They wanted us to cut our hair. They wanted us to become like them. And I think that to this day, many of our people from across North America who are Indigenous suffer of who they are. Their language was stripped. And I think that all because we were a people of harmony, a people of giving, trusting. And I think that when we don't, I think that the ministry has the idea of we want to make sure the kids are safe. So we'll take them out of the home and we'll put them somewhere else so they can be safe. But I think that it's not working because we're stripping, and I think I heard somebody say that earlier, just a few minutes ago, that they're being decolonized, they're being taken away still. I also think that this is, I don't know if it's safe to say this here, but we had a couple of our leaders within our community, MCFD, and the head guy, the head person that is up in the regional, had personal issues, drinking problems. Like, these are MCFD workers. People that are walking around and living a lifestyle that they're trying to say you got to uphold. And I seriously think that they are setting our people up for failure. If you do not do this, if you do not do that, you cannot have your children. If you don't jump high enough or low enough, you can't have your kids. You're not perfect. And I'm really thankful, and I pray for these social workers, because I believe that the truth should be exposed for some of these workers who live a lifestyle that they shouldn't even be where they're at. It makes me angry. It really does. Some families and some people who are social workers can't even get their kids back because they have personal issues. They don't think that we can have our kids at the end of the day. No. I'm angry, and not in a bad way, but I'm angry in a way that when these social workers or these directors get exposed, the ministry, there's no accountability. They just remove them and then they're gone. They don't apologize to us workers who are working in the front lines. They don't tell us that somebody else is going to be helping, or somebody else is going to be stepping there. There's no communication when it comes to the frontline workers, that who we are. We can't even build a bridge. There's nothing there to build. And in order for some things to happen, I think we need to have bridges being built. If we're all on the same page with MCFD, there should be a positive bridge that should be built. Yes, we need to keep our children safe. But at the end of the day, how will they be safe, and are we going to strip those things away? If that's the true goal that we each have for our children, Are we really burning those bridges thinking that it's right? When we as people, we have issues, everybody has issues. And what pisses me off, sorry to say a bad word, is that what really makes me angry is that we have all of these policies and procedures and what the ministry says, and we put all these people in these boxes, and yet, at the end of the day, who suffers? The kids. They're being stripped of who they are. And I just think to myself, and I'm an executive director, so I can have some say. I work in an Aboriginal women's organization. But I believe in prevention. I believe that before this actually happens, we know people, we always get these tips. So we make the home visit, and we go and see that family. We try to help them. We try to see where it's happening. We gave a bed to this lady because she had no furniture. Next couple days later, she put it on Facebook that she's selling it. Everybody was angry. Everybody was upset. How dare her do this? Being judgmental. We gave her this bed. But I said, you know what? There's a bigger issue here than just the bed. Why don't we go there and find out what's going on in her life? Find out that her baby needed diapers. We went down to the local store and asked them, let them know that we needed diapers, and if they gave it to us. You know, I think that we can't be so judgmental when we work in the front lines with our families. And it happens all the time. All the time. If we're going to help our people, we need, like I heard earlier, we need to walk with our people. Thank you.
I have a question for Robin. So throughout this time that you have been fighting to get back your children, what was the support that you got from your community and from women's organizations? And if you didn't, do you have any recommendations? Thank you.
Okay. Is this on? Hello? 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 Yeah. Okay. So, supports from my community. So I'm Blackfoot. I'm from Siksika Nation, Alberta. So basically, like, I feel, and so far moving forward, and what I have personally experienced is, you know, I have been alienated by my Indigenous community because I live here on the West Coast. So there's a little issue about, you know, the province to province. So basically, I am an urban Indigenous. I'm not from BC. I'm from Alberta. And usually the bands, like if I was in Alberta, the band would be coming to the courts and supporting me. But because I'm here in BC and all the policies and all the procedures are different, I have not had no band representation. I have reached out to Siksika Nation Alberta and have asked them to support, and you know, for this past 3 years, throughout these 3-year struggles. And basically, you know, I've just been having to learn to advocate for myself. And that's basically what I've been doing. So, you know, with these downtown East Side community supports and all these services, these were really the ones that I came to for the supports. So thank you so much for the question.
Good morning. Whoa, cowgirl. No, I just broke the microphone. Anyways, good morning, panelists. I just want to raise my arms up in gratitude to each of you for sharing your journeys with us. I am a C6 delegated social worker. And I shouted out to lady of 10 children. Oh my God, my arms are raised to you. My name is Bernie Charlie, And I currently reside in the unceded traditional homelands of the Tecumloops Tishiquepan people. My ancestry is Gitsan, Wet'suwet'en, Carrier, and I too come from a Potlatch people. So I sit with the Bear Clan of my people. And I've been doing social work, delegated agency social work for the last 8 years. And just coming here, I actually stumbled upon Feminist Deliver Conference because my daughter is in the Women Deliver Conference as a youth representative. I'm here partially for work, but also I am a volunteer board member for the BC Native Women's Association, and we're a provincial nonprofit organization, and our mandate is to advocate for women's children and their families because they are definitely on the margins of society, as referenced in the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report yesterday, child welfare. Like, we just need to do more for our children, more. And I'm so blessed and grateful that by you sharing your stories that, the message that I got is that culture is what we need to provide for our families, and our historical family cultures are definitely the way to bring back the essence of our traditional ways of knowing. And I think that it's important for many people, well, the world, to see that it is possible. And my arms are raised up to Robin for being your own self-advocate. Like, I'm so inspired by you that it's phenomenal, because I see our Indigenous families here and MCFD policies here, and it's still overarching. And, through family, just having that family value of keeping children connected, whether you have money or not. Money, you need money to survive, obviously. But you also just need that love. And I really raise my arms to you for taking in your 4 nieces and nephews. In addition to your 6, I'm like, I'm not worthy. Just because I think it's so important, and to, not lose sight of losing them to the system. And I'm discovering how backwards the current the child welfare system is. And, to the last presenter, the program that you deliver in harm reduction, Kamloops is like the hub, the gateway to the north, right? And so we have the same issues, and like the lady commented earlier, that it's still prescribed, like the child welfare policies in the communities beyond Kamloops are still very prescribed. And so I learned so much in terms of, using the system to break down those barriers and really create the connections and the community around our families, especially for our children, because they deserve it. So I'm very hopeful and I'm very inspired by each of you. So thank you, Masaicho, all my relations.
Can we hear me? Okay. I just wanted to respond just super quick. Thank you for all the words that have been shared. Thank you to my fellow panelists for what they've shared as well. You just got me thinking in terms of there's some Indigenous feminist writers out there. I'm thinking about Kim Anderson. I'm thinking about Cindy Baskin, who write about the elements in our Indigenous cultures that have been deliberately targeted, by colonization and by the government. Our languages, our families, our children, our potlatches, our ceremonies, those things that are at the core of who we are as Indigenous people. Our medicines, those are the things that have always, for thousands and thousands of years, kept us strong and connected to the land. And it's that connection to the land that they're wanting to break up. But these writers also talk about that those things that have been deliberately targeted by government and targeted by colonialism, those are the medicines that are going to help us and help our families rise up again. And we need to remember that. So what are they targeting, right? And kind of look at it in the opposite way. Those are the things that we need to be bringing back in every way that we can, and find funding and resources and allies, and partnerships to bring those medicines back to our families, because that's how we're going to continue to resist and to be resilient as Indigenous people. So I raise my hands to you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
My name is Brielle Morgan, and I'm a journalist at The Discourse. I cover the child welfare system, and I've been covering it for about 3 years. And I'm also managing a collaborative project called Spotlight Child Welfare, where journalists from 8 different outlets are all working together to cover the child welfare system in a deeper way, because we've heard so many valid criticisms about how the media fails to cover the system and to amplify parents' perspectives and youth's perspectives. I'm really interested in just inviting you guys to comment on how the media can better serve families that are caught up in the system and kids. And also, I just want to say I'm going to be here all day, and if anybody in the audience has a thought about how the media can better serve, I'd really love to hear from you, so please come talk to me.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that question around sort of the media's role?
Is this on? Okay. I guess I'll speak, because I have used the media in order to get my children back from the child welfare as a platform. And, the experience I had with the journalist that I was working with is, when she came to deal with me, she was a person first. She was a friend. She built that relationship. And, you got to take a lot of that judgment away. And when you're dealing with parents that are traumatized by the child welfare system, you need to come at a gentle way, can't just jump right into what's the trauma, what happened. You need to kind of, come and try to build a relationship. So, my hands go up to the journalist with Discourse Media that has been taking on my story, and my story is out there. So I just wanted to put that out there. So maybe you guys might have something to say.
Does this work? Yeah. I just think it's such an important story to get out there as much as possible. I have conversations with people all the time, and people just don't know that this is an issue. It's not portrayed widely in the media. People are like, what? They're taking away people's children on a daily basis? It's shocking and horrific, and it's just not out there widely in the public discourse. So I think anything that we can do to highlight stories of resistance, anything that we can do to highlight ways that the system is broken, and just to talk about the separation of families and that this is happening.
Yeah, so everyone go and follow Discourse Media and share the stories to spread the word that this is happening and we're resisting. Yes?
Hi, my name's Yvonne, and I missed the panel speaking. I was at an appointment, but I wished I was here. My children were apprehended in 1993, and no forewarning, nothing. I know by law you're supposed to get a warning. Our rights were violated from the get-go. I went to the rights of the children, you name it, the ombudsman. I went everywhere to get help, and sadly, my nation did not. Nobody ever showed up in court for me. I just got legal aid, and the social workers were telling my kids, well, your mother would prefer drugs and alcohol over you. These are the professionals telling my children this. conning them with gifts, and my kids did not go without. I worked. I wasn't on assistance. I worked fisheries. And so the stigma attached to, the Aboriginal that's on welfare, that are, having kids to get an extra welfare check, that's what we're stigmatized as, more. And the media, they did nothing. I went to the Vancouver Sun, the province, I wrote letters. I didn't get the time of day back. And the only time we seem to hit the news is when it's bad news. And I hate to say that, but that's what I feel anyway. And the only reason I really stood up was that kids need to have a voice. Children need to have a voice. I was the voice for my children, but it was to deaf ears. And I've reached out different places for support. I'm now 13 years off of drugs and alcohol, but I had 11 different workers in 3 years. So there really wasn't the support that I feel that's there. It's there, but it's not used properly. And they say what's the rights of the children? How do they put that now? The best interest of the children. They always say that. And my kids were all they were abused in foster care out in Maple Ridge. Two out in Maple Ridge. They're all 4 of them. They were all separated. I had 7 children, and I will say Melanie Mark is my daughter, and she was the one that went to bat for me. My daughter had to play the parent to go, and I dare to say that. Mel's not here today, but she was the one that became the parent, and I don't think that should have to happen. Why should that have to happen in this rich nation that we live in? It's just heartbreaking to see how many of our kids end up in care. And they say we're the only people that reimburse the government for apprehending our children. We're the only, pay them back for taking our kids. And I learned that through Viola Thomas when I was trying to get my kids back. So anyways, I could write a book about what's happened in my life, but I just wanted to share what I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think you've really sort of highlighted a really important point about the voice of children and how important the role of the mother is around that voice of the child, and that separation does not support. And so we just have a few more minutes. Robin has to run, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm glad I caught Robin. Child apprehension is a real problem. I want someone to address the children aging out of care, because I've met a lot of young people, 16, 17, that are out on the street and they age out of care. They had nowhere to go. Their foster parents have closed the door, and I want someone, we need a solution to that problem.
Thank you.
Hi. I work out in Langley at Ishtar Society as a domestic violence liaison it's a contract with MCFD. So I'm kind of one of the only ones in my organization that's just really directly trying to meet with MCFD and advocate for the women that I work with. And I just have a question about something that I've been struggling with quite a bit, which is that I find a lot of times the safety plans are just not collaborative at all, and it's very prescriptive on the side of MCFD and child protection. They sort of decide what really the safety should look like for the family. And I'm often trying to communicate that to the ministry and meeting with the social workers and telling them, the women aren't kind of wanting to follow through on these safety plans because it was not their idea in the beginning and they don't agree with them at all. And I'm I'm just so concerned because it often leads to removal because the families are just, they're not working together. It's just not collaborative at all. I'm just wondering if you guys have any ideas of how I, as a worker, can support those families and have their voices heard in that. I do a lot of just one-on-one meetings with their social workers to try to communicate these things, but it's a nightmare to actually be heard. So I'm sort of working now on trying to come up with sort of an alternative safety plan for families and, try to get the community more involved with them so that they have another way of presenting this to MCFD. But if you guys have any ideas.
Yeah. Robin has to speak at Women Deliver soon, so you're invited to leave whenever you need to. And then, I'll open it up if anybody has any ways that they've been able to challenge the safety plans and create one that's community-based.
Well, I'll answer this question since I am on my way out. Have another panel at Women Deliver this afternoon. A couple of ideas. One idea that really sticks out to me that, I've been really trying to advocate for is we need to bring our elders back to our community, back to our young mothers, and kind of pair them up with an elder. So that way they're able to teach them and to guide them the traditional ways. So I don't know. I think that we need to have more elders involved within the child apprehension before it even gets to social workers. So that's just a thought and an idea, but one day, hopefully, way back before colonization happened, when families would have problems or have trouble, we would just stick a cookum in the teepee. You know what I mean? And she would calm everything down. So I'd like to try to go back to those ways. And I don't know, it's just a thought. It's a solution. Find a community elder and get them to start working one-on-one with the parents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts to that question around responding to prescribed safety plans that really aren't safety plans?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to work if someone's not identifying that that's what they need, right? So, a mental health assessment or, this many counseling sessions with an A&D worker, a white A&D worker that you've never met before who has no idea about your history, it's not going to work. So if somebody's identifying that there's something that might work for them, that would be a good support for them, getting that in place, finding the funding for it. We just had a conversation with VACFAS recently about paying for elder support rather than A&D counseling sessions, paying for elders to meet with a couple rather than a violence prevention program that both of them have had to do 6 times over and it's not working. So just trying to take some of that redundancy out and put forward creative solutions ahead of time.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Just really quickly, I'm speaking, from, my position in Musqueam community. I recognize that each community is different and every family needs and how they define success for themselves is different, right? And we need to honor and respect that as well. Some of the approaches that we take in Musqueam is, early intervention is absolutely important. As soon as those safety plans are starting to get developed with the workers, our outreach team goes and meets with the team so we can develop the plans with them directly, right? So, and we do that outside of the context of that social worker meeting, right? Because social workers being there, it's loaded history of Indigenous families and social work, right? Social work is a very dirty word, very dirty pair of words in our communities, right? And there's a lot of power and a distrust, with social workers and in our families, and so we sort of take them out of it and just work with the families and ask them kind of, well, what are you thinking you need here? What do you think that the safety concerns are? What do we need to do? What do we need to work on together to sort of get you to where you need to be to have balance and safety in your home again? And then we develop those alternatives ahead of time so that when we go into the meetings with the social workers, we can throw those ideas back at them, right? These are the supports that are more meaningful, more relevant, for this family. And yeah, some of the safety plans are very prescriptive. I've seen it. And social workers will load all these different, appointments and all this stuff that families need to run around for. And I think it's just, they need that advocate with them as well, to be like, that's like ridiculous. Like, would you be able to attend like 8 appointments in 1 week, and running all over the place and all these different counselors? Like, that's stressful, right? Like, our parents, our caregivers need to be focusing on their children, right, and themselves and their own healing, not, running around trying to catch buses, and being extra exhausted and all that, right? So I think it's just sort of putting that stuff into context and helping the social workers understand that we're there to help them with their plans as well, but their plans need to be realistic, right? Like, and what they're, another thing that we do is, really hold the social workers accountable to those child safety concerns. Those child safety concerns are in the immediate report, right? The first report that goes in, that's what they're following. And so when they start to prescribe all these crazy things, to our families, it's okay, so how does that address the child safety concern? I thought we already covered that, right? We already did, with this support that the mom or the caregiver is gonna go to, right? Hold them to the child safety concern. That's what's going to make them kind of back off. And if more times than not, they're not able to answer, how what they're prescribing addresses the need, right? They're just kind of loading it on and all of that. So, just be really clear with them, right? Like, hold them to their own process. And if they can't answer it, then it's off the table, right? So that's just my thoughts on that.
Go ahead.
History can teach us some very important lessons, and I wish to speak about the lessons that we can learn from my colonizing ancestors. My mother's people, the first Bérard came from France in the 1600s and founded a fur trading dynasty that came all the way to the west, and I'll talk a bit more about that afterward. But it's the way that when I was doing a lot of hunting through genealogy, that I came across a piece of my first grandmother's born of European ancestry in Canada applied to her, because some legal records from the early 1600s onward from Quebec became forward. And that's when I discovered how poor the colonizing people were at protecting their own children. She, when she was still a 10-year-old, there are legal records in there of how she, as a 10-year-old, she and another 10-year-old were violently raped by an older man in her community 350 years ago exactly, and I now know this about my first great-grandmother. She did go on to have a good and happy life. My first great-grandfather of European ancestry who came to Canada came in the, married her when she was 15 and he was 29. And 2 of her sons went on to marry Mohawk women and come out to Alberta and founded that branch of the fur trade. But the fact is that this young little fledgling European community was very poor at protecting its own children, and I think we should think about that.
Thank you. Thanks. So just going to quickly wrap up and sort of pull some calls to action that I've heard today, and that sort of things that would support the work that this group of people are doing is understanding the historical context of the child welfare system and how it is steeped in judgment, and that as we move on and do our work and hear more about child welfare, that our role as women and feminists are to come alongside and support our other moms, our moms, and encourage them and break down those myths and judgments that are in place. And other things that I've heard is around issues that are sort of plaguing is around housing and the opioid crisis and all these things that are sort of layered on top of all that, and it's a heavy burden to bear. And so we have calls to action out there. There needs to be political will to put them through. And so everyone here, a simple letter highlighting that these calls to action need to be that we need to move them forward. They're not sitting dusty on a shelf. That's important work.
Just want to extend my gratitude to our panelists and our facilitator. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and share your words with all of us. I know we could easily have you up here all day. This is an important topic. We could have people on all of our panels up here all day, so I'm grateful for all of you being here and sharing your stories and your wisdom. And just on that note about political will, I was over there thinking about a similar thing, is that it takes women 7 times to be asked to run for office. So if you've never been asked to run for an elected position, consider this your first time being asked. The answers and the solutions are here in this room, and we need to have the pride and the trust in ourselves to know that those systems, we need to blow them up from the inside as well. So not only do we need our warriors on the front lines doing all of this work, but if you are on that front line and you are ready to take the next step, please consider taking that next step into those rooms that make those policies, into those rooms that make those budget allocations, and take someone's hand and keep bringing everybody up. So find somebody to replace you and take that next step up. So that's for each of you as well. So find somebody to replace the work that you're doing and take that next step up. So thank you very much. So a little bit of housekeeping. We have a break now until 11:30. If everyone could make it into their breakout sessions by 11:30. There is free drip coffee and some snacks that are accessible. We are having a bit of a late lunch this afternoon. Lunch won't be until about 1:15, I believe. So if you need a quick nourishment to get you through to that lunch break, there's some available over there. And yes, we have amazing breakout sessions: precarious realities, work is work is work, spectrum of harm reduction, criminal justice. So a lot of things to get us all energized and inspired. So please break till 11:30 and then make your way into your breakout session. So OCM.